Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone. We would like to first and foremost thank you for your presence in this small room that has so much human warmth and that also solo estoy haciendo just to thank you for waiting for us. We were just left a meeting with the president. I would like to tell you a few things. There is interpretation available from English to Spanish. President Margaret May Macaulay, the first Vice President Roberta Clark speak in English, for which if you need interpretation, then I understand that each of you should have it available. The second thing we'd like to remind you of is that we have live transmission in English and Spanish through YouTube from CIDH, and the press conference will be public in our YouTube and our website, www.cidh.org. At the end, we're going to be giving you the QR code with the preliminary observations that are available on the website. And if you agree, at the end, there will also be a question and answers round that I'll be moderating. If it's okay with you, I would like to now allow the people that don't need to speak to talk on the phone, if you could please do it on the hall. This is a very small space, so the colleagues that have their telephone on, we would really appreciate if you could put it on vibrate or in mute. We will now begin. And for this, I would like to thank the President Margaret May Macaulay for the use of the word. The space is yours, Madam President.
Good afternoon, everyone. I will just take my mask on for 2 seconds for photograph so you can see my face. Thank you. Okay. I'm sorry, I do this because my doctor orders it. So, thank you very much for taking your time to come and be with us this afternoon at this press conference and to learn of our preliminary observations which we've made in local visit. Okay. I have a short statement to read, and this is it. Today, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights presents the preliminary observations of the in loco visit to Honduras, which took place from April 24th to the 28th, 2023. And it is aimed to verify the human rights situation on the ground in Honduras. The observations highlight structural improvements and challenges which the country faces. And these are related to A, inequality and poverty, B, health, C, education, D, violence with a differential impact on women. E, citizen security. F, judicial independence. G, access to justice or lack thereof. And D, social, environmental, and land conflicts. We also analyze the problems which affect particular groups which have been historically discriminated and excluded, such as indigenous peoples, Afro-descendant and Garafudas, women, children, elderly people, the LGBTI community, people in mobility, human rights defenders, people with disabilities, and persons deprived of liberty. The Commission also recognizes that in Honduras, human rights challenges face a complex reality in which long-standing structural factors and problems converge. And this results in pending issues that cannot be postponed. The Inter-American Commission of Human Rights held, during the visit, 87 meetings. These included authorities of the three branches of government, autonomous bodies, international organizations, civil society organizations, indigenous peoples, Afro-descendants, Garifuna peoples, human rights defenders, prisoners, academics, journalists, and representatives of the private sector, and religious representatives. It also gathered testimonies from victims of human rights violations and their families. To hold these meetings, the Commission traveled to cities of La Esperanza, Tegucigalpa, San Juan, Tela, San Pedro Sula, and visited 4 of the prisons. The Commission thanks the state of Honduras for its openness to international scrutiny, which resulted in the consent to conduct this visit, and in a frank and constructive dialogue at the highest level. The Inter-American Commission of Human Rights is also grateful for the information provided by the various state institutions and civil society organizations, and we also appreciate the cooperation provided by the National Office of the Organization of American States in Honduras and the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and other United Nations offices. The delegation was led by me, Margaret May Macaulay, President of the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, the second Vice President, Roberta Clark, Commissioner Carlos Bernal Polido, Rapporteur for Honduras, Commissioner Julissa Mantilla Falcon, and a rapporteur for women's rights and for memory, truth, and justice, and Commissioner Joel Hernandez, rapporteur for migrants, persons in mobility, and for the human rights defenders and justice operators. I slipped to that name because it was changed. And Commissioner Ralol for a short while, who is the rapporteur for persons in detention, deprived of liberty. The delegation was accompanied by the Executive Secretary, Tanya Renaud Panzi, the Chief of Staff, Patricia Colchero, the Deputy Executive Secretary, Maria Claudia Polido. I think she had to leave for the airport this afternoon. The Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression, Pedro Vaca. The Special Rapporteur for Economic, Social, Cultural, and Environmental Rights, Soledad Garcia Munoz, and specialist from the Executive Secretariat. I would like to conclude now by emphasizing that it is essential for the state to promote a sincere and open dialogue with all sectors, including dissident voices, and to guarantee the active participation of groups which have been historically excluded and discriminated in this country. It is the only way the state will be able to provide an integrated and effective response to the country's needs and regain the confidence of the entire population in its institutions here in Honduras. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Madam President. Now I will read the preliminary observations that were issued by the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights. I would like to remind you that this text will be available at the end of the presentation in your QR codes that we will be providing at the end of the session. In the last 14 years, the CIDH has visited in 4 occasions the country of Honduras, 3 after the coup d'etat. In 2012, we conducted a work visit to observe the visit of the persons imprisoned, and in 2014 and 2018, they visited the country to monitor the general situations of human rights. During these visits, we observed consistently a series of structural situations that have affected during decades the risks of the human rights of the population. For a wide sector of the population, the elected government in the 28 November 2021 represents a hope and the promise of change. They elected the first woman president in Honduras, Xiomara Castro, with a citizen participation of 68.5% of voters, which took up an engagement to put human rights as one of the main axes of their government. The Commission recognizes the complex Honduran reality in which we have a structural, long-standing programs that have differentiated impacts and groups that have been historically discriminated against, such as women, children, girls, adolescents, elderly persons, indigenous people, Afro-descendants, and Garifuna people, people living with disabilities, LGBTI people in prison, human rights defenders and journalists. We take note of the efforts done by the government to take on these structural issues, and now we will number five considerations in regards to this. In first place, inequality and poverty of certain populations, groups of the Honduras have a a larger exposure to as a result of the historic persistent discrimination and the lack of access to economic, social, and cultural and environmental rights. We observe with concern that according to public data, the levels of poverty may reach 73% of the population, being extreme poverty 54% of this. Poverty affects access to education, observing high levels of school dropout and about half of childhood in school age are not enrolled, and those that have the possibility to study, they usually do it in facilities that in poor state without water or hygiene. On the other side, we received reports from lack of attention in healthcare services at different levels, lack of medicine and also medical provisions and insufficient healthcare provisioners that are working in conditions of instability. We believe that it's part of the public policies and the measures that the state have established to be positive for recovery of school infrastructure, increase of budget, and reduction of works and combat against corruption, as well as the law of special zones of the economic development, and the presentation of a bill of law of tax justice. And thirdly, there in Honduras there are social and environmental and agriculture conflicts related to land and territory in which there are structural issues within an economy that is based in extraction, manufacturing, excessive concessions. The distribution of land and resources is inequitable. Institutionality that is in charge of registering and titling deed as the weekend. There are irregularities in the authorizing and concession of projects of development and a lack of effective response from the authorities. This conflict has differentiated impact on indigenous Afro-Honduran Garifuna people as well as the farmers, as well as those that are defenders of the land, territory, and the environment. The CIDH has received information on the increase of violence and criminality against those that defend the land, the territory, and the environment in Bahuaguan. The violent structures have reactivated after the signature of an agreement celebrated between the government, the agriculture platform, and the coordinator of popular organizations in Aguan in February 2022, giving place to the murder of eight farmer leaders. It is alleged that the police is colluding with armed groups and the impunity reigns in the area. The state has indicated to move forward in the dialogues to constitute the tri-party commission to comply to the commitments engaged in this agreement, and it would be important for the investigation of the violations of human rights and the reparations of the victims. The Commission is sad on the lack of progress in and the measures of reparation ordained by the Inter-American Court in the ruling in the Garifuna communities in Punta Piedra and Triunfo de la Cruz. They invite the state to comply to the decisions adopted by the organs of the Inter-American system related to the rights of the different groups of indigenous people as well as Afro-Honduran people. The Commission received information on the creation of a national table institutional of prevention and to social conflicts, 14 technical tables on prevention, and 9 interinstitutional tables, and the creation of commissions for specific cases. For the CIDH, it is essential that according to the complexity of the case, these initiatives are articulated at the highest level and under an integral policy that allow for structural changes that the CIDH takes note of the declaration of Honduras as a country free of mining and open sky, and in the issue of companies and human rights to the new policy of the period 2023-2024, as well as the will to adopt a national plan in this area. However, it is urgent for the state to guarantee the international standards to access of information, participation, and justice from the communities. They adopted a plan of action of companies and human rights and ratifies the agreement of Escazú. And the third level, when it comes to violence and security system, the the homicide rate has been the lowest in 16 years. Honduras continued to be the most violent country in Central America and the third most insecure country in the region. It's alarming the high levels of feminist femicides and murders to women, LGBTI persons, and people and human rights defenders, particularly those that defend the land, the territory, and the environment. This, likewise, it is concerning situation of disappearances of women, girls, and adolescents, and absence of official numbers on this regard. The Commission values the progress registered in the gradual demilitarization of the security and the penitentiary system, as well as the change in the focus in security, where they propose to prioritize the gender perspective, preventing crime, and a community methodology to improve of relationships with the society. The state is facing a complex context in regards to violence and security. In this context, the state of exception that has been lengthened in three occasions have been extended geographically to 123 municipalities in the country is a reality. The CIDH about the lack of justification that demonstrates the need and the proportionality of this as well the lack of counterweights and judicial controls effective to promote this measure that has an exceptional character as well as temporary. Honduras must ensure that their measures are adapted to the standards of human rights and that their public policy of security guarantees the citizen participation both in the design as well as the implementation. And fourthly, it is the responsibility of the state to guarantee a independent judicial party. The CIDH salutes the process of election of the Supreme Court of Justice with the election of first Afro-Honduran person in the presence of 8 women, and a new legal framework for the integration of the denominating board that allowed for a larger social participation and more transparency. Now, it's still pending to promote a law of the Council of Adjudication and the judicial career that adapts to international standards in regards to independence, particularly in regard with the disciplinary regimes and the separation of the position. The Commission has received information about alleged transfers of prosecutors contrary to the current normative and as well as labor surcharge, lack of measures of protection, and lack of proper wages, remuneration. We observe that impunity and corruption issues continue to persist. Impunity in regards to crimes in general would supersede 90%, reaching up to a 95 and 97% for crimes against women and people, human rights offenders. When it comes to battling corruption, CDH salutes the creation of a Ministry of Transparency and fight against corruption, and they observe with attention negotiations for the possible installment of the International Commission Against Corruption and Impunity in Honduras with United Nations. We trust that this mechanism will become a reality in the short term. And I will expose how the structural issues have a differentiated impact in 10 groups that are in a historic situation of discrimination and exclusion. In regards to human rights defenders, Honduras continues to be one of the most dangerous countries in the Americas and the world. In the fourth quarter, fourth in 2023, at least 8 have died in violent conditions. 6 of them had protection measures from the state. In this context, it is relevant to the strengthening of the mechanisms for the protection of defenders, journalists, and communicators, on which the CIDH has reserved concerning information about technical obstacles, administrative as well as financial, that don't allow it to provide a prompt and effective response to the requesters and beneficiaries. Those who defend land and territory and the environment face the most important dangers that become even more severe when it comes to women, indigenous people, Afro-Hondurans, and Garifunas. the undue use of the penal right, as well as usurpation, the damage to private property, and even forced displacement continues to be a method of repercussions to obstruct the activities of defense. On the other side, when it comes to indigenous people, Afro descendants, and Garifuna, CIDH has observed situations of conflict, and when it comes to land and ancestral land and territory of indigenous people, and those that are to have been traditionally and historically occupied by Garifuna people. In particular, the Commission was informed about the progress of pro- projects of commercial and tourist development in collective territories of these people without obtaining the free consent previous and informed from the communities. When it comes to the rights of women, the Commission salutes the strengthening of the institutionality and protection of human rights of women, in particular the creation of the Ministry of State, the dispatch of affairs of the women, the continuity and expansion of the project Ciudad Mujer, the bill against violence, when it regards to violence against women, that will be sent to the National Congress for its approval, the signature of the executive agreement for the free use and commercialization of the emergency contraceptive pill, and the approval of the law of comprehensive sex education for the prevention of teenage pregnancies. However, we observe with concern the persistence of gender violence, even in its more extreme forms such as femicides, the disappearance of women. The civil society has registered in around 270 cases in 2022. The very little or no access to women living in remote or rural areas to services of care, protection, and justice, lack of budget for the implementation of laws and programs, and the absolute penalization of abortion, and the lack of official numbers of women that are condemned or processed due to this crime. When it comes to the rights of LGBTI people, the Commission recognizes the efforts of the government to include this theme in their government plan with the ends to guarantee their rights, as well as the initial measures that have been adopted to recognize the ruling of the case Vicky Hernandez. However, it is concerning the high levels of violence observed in the country, and this is social and legal discrimination that they are exposed to. We have received information in the context of regime of exception, and more than 40 deaths that have happened in 2022, making it so one of the years with most deaths in the recent history. We note with concern the lack of an official registry of these numbers and the lack of a law of gender identity in regards to inter-American standards. When it comes to the girls, boys, and adolescents, the Commission is concerned of a high percentage that is living on the streets without access to healthcare services and education that are victims of forced labor. In a context that is characterized by violence and the presence of criminal structures, thousands of girls, boys, and adolescents are victims of multiple ways of violence, and they are recruited forcefully by criminal groups, forcing them to flee even without their families. In the case of minors in transit through Honduras, there are heightened risks to their lives and integrity. When it comes to the elder persons, we have received information that indicates that only 8% receive a pension, and that there are centers of elder persons that wouldn't be duly registered, giving place to situations of abandonment and or addictions. It is urgent to formulate policies and programs that will allow a dignified old age, and that the state can adhere to Commission for the Protection of Human Rights of Older Persons for a comprehensive recognition and guarantee of the rights. When it comes to the rights of people living with disabilities, Honduras has the law of equality and development for people living with disabilities. However, it can't be duly applied because it doesn't have the normative. This normative is in contraposition with the social model of disability based on a medical and assistentialist focus. In the same way, the organizations of civil society has denounced that people living with disabilities are forced to migrate to the country, mainly due to the differentiated impact of violence, a lack of work opportunities, and the lack of access to an adequate infrastructure and reasonable adaptations. When it comes to people and human mobility, Honduras continues to be a country of origin and transit for migrants and refugees. The state has informed that in 2022 there was an entry of more than 188,000 people from other countries, the highest number in the history. The National Congress, and the will of change of migration policies with a focus of protection, has approved in May an amnesty of 90 days for migrant individuals that entered irregularly to the country, ex- not having to pay for the administrative sanction that is included in the law of migration and however, there is a comprehensive concept of a dignified reception of Honduran migrants return that guarantees their reintegration. The recent adoption and promotion of the law of internal displacement represents a significant progress in the protection of the rights of the people that are submitted to forced internal displacement. The Commission makes a call for the quick implementation of this law in regards to the international standards, since because according to numbers of UNHCR, according to the end of March 2023, there's estimated more than 277,000 people have been forcefully displaced, finding them being in among the main causes social control and territory control that is exercised by organized crime and armed groups, extortion, the eviction and usurpation and destruction of houses, land, and property, gender violence, political violence, and violence to human rights, as well as the effects of climate change. When it comes to persons in prison, the Commission values the demilitarization of the detention centers and takes note of the naming of an intervention commission to guarantee the rights of the centers. However, there are elevated levels of violence between the criminal structures, and there persist the challenges identified during the last years in regards to the high rates of overcrowding that supersede 200% in the case of women, uh, excessive employment on preventive and violence to up to 50%, lack of application of obstacles to access benefits of liberty, corruption, access to high caliber arms, and the reduced number of people that are in charge of custody are an element that is very grave. In the centers that were observed, we saw infrastructures with the physical deficiency and lack of hygiene, insufficient medical assistance, challenges in access to potable water, and an amount of food products that was insufficient. They were away from their families, very little activities to social reinsertion, and lack of spaces respectful with those girls and boys that are in the centers with the mothers that are in prison. It is concerning to the situation of the detained adolescents in the center of maximum security, Alteva Nuevo, and the lack of adoption of measures of protection of boys, girls, and adolescents in the middle, in the in free that are in high risk of being again captured by organized crime. Finally, in regards to journalists, violence and impunity is one of the most severe violations to the right of free expression. Since the last report and the country report in 2018, the Special Rapport has documented at least 13 crimes against journalists and workers from communications outlets. There hasn't been significant advance in their investigation. During the visit, it was reported attacks were reported that caused great fear to those that are covering issues related to corruption, organized crime, citizen security, migration, and agriculture conflicts. It is fundamental for the state to adopt a specialized protocol that would ensure the proper investigation and provides budget to the Special Prosecutor's Office for the protection of human rights defenders, journalists, social communicators, and justice operators to guarantee their effective functioning. Once we've analyzed the structural issues and their impact on multiple populations, I will conclude by pointing out some current situations that would require urgent response. The CIDH has received information of the obstacles for the exercise of the parliamentarian activity from parties of opposition, lack of budget assignation, and the multiple challenges from the public management, and the denounce of massive public service conducted by political affiliation and questioning to the assignation of responsibilities of high management. When it comes to institutionality and human rights, the Commission values the increase in the budget allocation of the National Commissioner of Human Rights in Honduras. However, it was informed on the need to strengthen the legal proceedings of selection of of the person that will be in charge in order to guarantee their independence. When it comes to the reduction of civic spaces of participation, Commission has taken knowledge of this of the reduction of the legal registry of non-government, environmental, religious, and social assistance uh, uh, organizations due to a lack of presentation their financial states and their in the face of structural challenges they have been identified, the government must direct the public administration for the benefit of the whole population. In this effort, it is fundamental to promote a frank, open, and transparent dialogue with all sectors of the society, including this dissident voices, with the active participation of groups of population that historically have been excluded and discriminated against in Honduras. The Commission trusts the state of Honduras will work to guarantee and maintain a constitutional order that is aligned with the protection of human rights, and they appreciate the open and dialogue at the highest level that is sincere and constructive. They value the information provided by the different state entities and organizations from civil society and the collaboration provided by the different offices of the System of United Nations. If you agree, we can now begin with questions and answers toward it. Thank you very much. Can we ask now? Yes, please go ahead. I can't hear. Thank you, Madam President. So I am Noé Leiva from the French Agency of Press. What can the inter-American system do, not only the Commission but the court, to ensure the rulings such as Punta Piedra and Triunfo de la Cruz? And that for you, also for if you could explain what did you discover in regards to San Juan, because there's supposed to be another ruling in regards to this. Thank you, Noe. If you agree, we're going to take two more questions, and we're going to do three question rounds. Good afternoon. I'm Eliana Borjas from Radio Progreso. I'm interested in to hear that you have mentioned progressive efforts to demilitarize citizen security. However, we see that in the latest extension of the state of exception, the government of the government has sent 7 battalions of. Third question. Thank you. Vicente Turcios, 10 and Tien 5. In the case of the judges, where they haven't respected the inability, what actions will you take? Because I understand this is a preliminary report, and then you will then do another report. But again, I will repeat, the immovability hasn't been respected, and it seems to be other attempts, other transfers that are in the line that haven't been requested yet. How will you deal with this? Vicente Turcios, TN5. Thank you. Rapporteur for Honduras, would you like to answer second and third? Well, thank you very much. I would like to just refer to two of the three questions, second and third. In regards to the third, one of the our concerns, and it will appear so in the in preliminary comments as well as the final report, is the need to strengthen the rule of law, which implies judicial independence on the one side, and on the secondly, having a statute that would allow this judicial independency from all members of the this means inability of the judges, that they have a dignified wage, and that the conditions of promotion are properly defined, and that the transfers cannot be arbitrary, etc. Those are the inter-American standards in regards to the judicial branch, and I believe that it's one of the most important aspects of this report will be the maintenance of those standards. In regards to the question that is very interesting that you have asked, also some of the recommendations refer to the use of the state of exception. We recognize that the maintenance of our public order is something that is complex in all countries, and that at first the assessment that is done in regards to the use of the state of exception, on the one side, politically, it corresponds to the government. Secondly, there is a component of political control from the Congress, and in many countries, judicial control, which is some of the measures that are taken. However, there are multiple standards, inter-American standards, that are very important. And it's, first of all, that the state of exception has to have a final date, meaning the state of exception can't become a state that's normalized. What justifies the state of exception is the existence of situations that are enormously anormal, the enormous enormosity of what's anormal, what justifies the temporary existence of a state of exception. Secondly, the moment the momentaneous suspension of certain guarantees, constitutional guarantees, should also be temporary. And here is an important aspect, which is that it has to be proportional. It has to be proportional, meaning it has to be ideal for the ends that is looked for, that is the least restrictive, and that in considering of what's the wins and the losses, and then that measure should be justified. And under that context, it's where we should have assessed not only the measure that you express, but also all of the measures of a state of exception. Thank you very much. Yes. To add what was said by my colleague, Commissioner Carlos Bernal, in regards to the judicial, I would like to add that one of the preliminary observations that we've made is to point out that there is a pending for the promotion of a law of the Council of Adjudication and Judicial Career that adapts to the international standards in regards to judicial independence, particularly to regulate aspects related to naming during their career, to the promotions, to performance reviews, to disciplinary processes, as well as the separation of their position. I would also like to answer the first question that has to do with rulings from the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Here, quite simply, would like to point out that the assessment of the compliance of these rulings is within the role of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Colleague, if you could please identify yourself. Yes, good afternoon. My name is Carlos Gonzalez of Asociar Emprende, United States. I would like to know what were the recommendations that you have given to the state of Honduras in regards to the deaths of human rights defenders and environmental rights defenders, taking into consideration that you've expressed in your report that Honduras continues to be one of the most violent countries for the environmental defenders. Second question for this round. Dina Mesa, Pasos de Animal Grande. I would like to ask if you have any methodology of follow-up to the recommendations, because you've come here 4 times to Honduras. And how are you monitoring this compliance to the recommendations, especially the ones made in 2018, and it's repeated with some that you had provided this year? Thank you very much. If you could please go to the microphone. Thank you. My name is Gustavo Palencia. I work for the agency of Reuters. This is just a clarification. In the report, it says that you quoting UNHCR that until March there have been 270,000 forced displacements. Before, UNHCR has given some numbers of in 2004 to 2018 of 243,000. So are you referring to this period of March to this year, or what period of time are you referring to? Because 270,000 is an enormous amount of IDPs, of internally displaced persons. Commissioner, President Commissioner, would you like to respond, or the Commissioner Joel Hernandez?
Yes, so the first question. You asked about the recommendations in our report. First of all, this is not our report. These are preliminary observations. Our country report will be prepared after we go back to Washington, and the Secretariat and the commissioners will work for over a period of months to prepare the country report based on the in loco visit. In that report, we will make recommendations to the state. We have not really made clear, formal recommendations in the observations. So, thank you.
If I may, Madam President, I'm going to answer to questions 1 and 3. In our preliminary observations, we express our concern due to the situation of vulnerability suffered by those by human rights defenders, and we are very sorry for the deaths that have happened recently, especially eight that have happened in this year in Guapinol. I must also point out that our conversations with the authorities of the state, we have found an engagement to move forward in the protection of the human rights defenders and the prevention of their attacks, as well as an engagement to move forward in the investigations and sanctions of those that are responsible. There is a coincidence in the importance to guarantee and respect the right to defend the human rights. And as we have pointed out, there has also been a calling to strengthen national mechanism of protection of human rights defenders and journalists. In regards to the third question, we must be precise that the number that was read by the executive secretary refers to the number of individuals according to official data that have entered the country and foreign individuals that have come into the country. It has nothing to do with another phenomenon, which is individuals that are victims of forced displacement, internal forced displacement. Madam Commissioner?
I'll address part of the question on methodology for follow-up to the recommendations. Someone asked about the recommendations made in previous country reports. That's a really important question that you've asked. Implementation of the Commission's recommendations, no, country report, you said. Okay, implementation of recommendations wherever they come from, cases, petitions, or country reports, really depends on the political will of the state. And what is political will? Political will is the intention and the capacity to achieve a desired result. And so we depend on the political will of the state, and we try to reinforce that political will by providing capacity development training. So when we make recommendations, we also support the state in understanding the scope of those recommendations and the methods in which those recommendations can be implemented. We also are quite clear that we have to promote the standards of the Commission. So again, states are clear, but not only states, the citizens, civil society organizations are clear about the recommendations and the standards which underpin the recommendations. Civil society engagement with the Commission is a really important component of the follow-up, because it is at country level that the political demand lies for implementation of actions that will redress or remedy violations of human rights and also guarantee non-repetition. And so we are in constant contact with civil society organizations to receive information, which we then use to ask the state questions when there is non-compliance or limited compliance with the recommendations made. So that's another one of our tools, our letters, our confidential letters to member states to ask them what are they doing about the recommendations. These are some of the ways in which we follow up.
We also hold working meetings with the state and the parties and the representatives to physically speak with them directly as to what exactly the state is doing to implement. recommendations, and so on. And remember that it is the state's primary duty to implement recommendations and decisions of the court. And decisions of the court go further because they themselves accepted the jurisdiction of the court, the state did, and they are legally bound to implement. That's why what their acceptance of the jurisdiction of the court mean, having signed the American Convention. They're legally bound, and they must implement as if the decision of the court is a judgment of the highest court in Honduras, as if it's a local, national judgment. So even the court monitors, follows, questions, has working meetings, and so on, to try to get the state to implement.
So in the case of 270,000, I'm seeing here in the report that this has increased, and it says that to March, UNHCR, March 2023, it estimates that more 270,000 individuals have displaced forcefully in Honduras, and they attribute this to violence. My question is, does this refer to 270,000 individuals only in March to January 2023, or does this refer to previous numbers? Because it would be scandalous that this would be the news if 270,000 people were displaced in 3 months in Honduras. This number is a number that we've taken from UNHCR, a point from a press conference that saluted the approval from the National Congress of a law that establishes a legal framework essential to respond to the complex situation of thousands of displaced individuals due to the force in Central American country. And it continues that agency from United Nations by saying that in Honduras, the violence that has provoked the displacement of more than 247,000 people, out of which 57% are women and 43% are boys, girls, and adolescents. The SOYU timeline, it's general. But from which period? 247,000, we knew that, but before, actually, there's a report from 2018. But here it says that to March 2023, 270,000. Yes, okay. Let me look for the specific reference point of our own report to give you this timeline. Who's next in the questions?
Buenas tardes,
Good
soy
afternoon.
defensor
I
independiente de
am
derechos
independent
humanos.
defender of human rights.
En Honduras,
In
la justicia
Honduras,
o el acceso a la
justice or
justicia está
access to
condicionado
justice
por la
is
ideología
conditioned by
política.
political
Hasta el
ideology.
momento no
To
existe
this
una
moment,
sola
in Honduras, there
organización
isn't an
política
organization
que
that is
realmente
apolitical
cumpla
that
con las
really complies
expectativas de
with the
garantizar los
expectations to
derechos humanos
guarantee
de
human
personas
rights
como
of
yo,
individuals such as
que nos hemos
myself,
dado a
that
conocer
have
por
made
ser
ourselves
parte de
known because we're
ninguna
not part of
ideología,
any
mucho menos de un
ideology,
partido
even less
político
so a
para ser
political
defensores
party
de
to be
derechos humanos.
human rights
Hasta el
defenders.
momento,
To this moment.
yo soy
I am
policía
a
de
former
la
police
depuración, estamos siendo
officer, and we are
criminalizados
being
por el simple hecho
criminalized by the simple
de
fact
haber
that
sido policía
we
y porque
were
fui
police
defensor
officers
de los
because I was
derechos
defender
humanos
of
de
human
que estoy
rights,
fuera de la
and this is
Policía
why I
Nacional.
have been ousted from the
No
police force.
existe
There
y no hay ninguna
isn't, and
organización
there
en Honduras
isn't
que
any
esté
organization in Honduras
politizada,
that
ya
isn't
sea la del Estado o
politicized,
ya sea la que
whether
no
it's
están
the state or
presentes,
those that are present here,
dicen ser de sociedad
and then
civil.
they say
Digo
they
que
are civil society.
forzosamente
I must,
estar en el
I
silencio
must
con
be in
perfil bajo para
silence with a
hacer
low
cuando
profile
he atendido cuando vaya a
to be
poner
careful
una
when I
denuncia.
will
Si
present a
soy
report.
conocido por
If
dar
I
a
am
conocer a
known
mí,
because
por
I'm
mi parte
divulging
ideología,
about my lack of
nadie me quiere
ideology,
atender.
no one wants to pay
Organizaciones de
attention to me.
sociedad civil me
Civil
tiraron
society
la puerta en la
organizations
cara porque
have closed
sabían
their
que yo
doors
no
in my
era
face
de
because they knew
izquierda o de
that I
derecha.
wasn't from the left
Y
or the right.
organizaciones del Estado, como
And
el Comisionado
organizations of the
Nacional
states
de
or
los
the National
Derechos
Commission
Humanos, tuve
of
que
Human
hacer huelgas
Rights,
de
I
hambre,
had to
tuve que
do
hacer
hunger
huelgas
strikes
para que tomaran
to
una queja mía y el
so they
defensor de
could
hoy,
take one of my
que el
complaints,
tiempo límite
and up
según
to
su
do
ley
this
es de
day,
10
the
días,
limit time
no ha
according to their
escuchado
law,
mi
it's 10
denuncia
days. They
y tuve
haven't
que hacer
heard to my
diferentes plantones para
to
lograr
have to do
fechas y formas.
multiple actions. Do you have
La
a
pregunta
concrete
es,
question?
¿qué oficinas
The
están
question
implementando
is,
ustedes
what
para gente como
measures
yo
are
sin
you
ideología?
putting in place with
Porque
people
hasta el
such as
momento
myself
no
that don't
existe
have an
ninguna.
ideology?
O
Because
soy
to
de
this
izquierda o
time,
de derecha y no escuchamos.
if I'm not from left or right, I'm not heard. Thank you very much, and thank you for having participated in tables of conversation in these days. I know that we've heard you. Next question, please. No more questions? Thank you. So now I'm going to approach you so we can have a conversation for the second time this week. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to those to members of the press for being here with us. Very good afternoon. Thank you.